Good morning and welcome to the DC Bar's Brief Encounters podcast. My name is Parveen Huda. I'm chair of the Human Rights and Immigration Subcommittee of the DC Bar's International Law Community. I will be speaking today solely in this capacity. Today's podcast is being recorded on Friday, August 7th, 2026. Today's program is exploring a global problem, the disproportionate impact of climate change on marginalized communities, in particular, already vulnerable women whose livelihoods depend upon increasingly threatened habitats. I will speak with Shalini Iyengar, a lawyer specializing in environmental law and human rights and currently a doctoral candidate in anthropology at Yale, and Kaustav Mukherjee, an award-winning filmmaker whose first feature-length documentary, The Tiger Widows, examines a community of women, largely widows, who live in the West Bengal Indian part of the Sundarbans. The world's largest contiguous mangrove forest, the Sundarbans forest is located in a delta region that spans India and Bangladesh. During the past 5 decades, Royal Bengal tigers have killed at least 3,000 men and women who live in the Sundarbans. These deaths have had particularly serious consequences for so-called tiger widows, whose husbands have been killed while venturing into the forest to hunt or fish. As we will explore, these women have demonstrated remarkable resilience despite sustaining tremendous losses. We will also learn about a recent court ruling acknowledging their rights to receive compensation for their husbands' deaths, a landmark development under Indian law. With that in mind, I want to turn to our guests. Welcome to the program, Shalini and Kaustav.
Thank you. Really happy to be here.
Same here. Thank you, Parveen, and the DC Bar Association. Really happy to be here and providing my viewpoint.
Great. Well, thank you. Shalini, I'm going to draw on your legal and scholarly expertise first, and then I'll turn to Kaustav about the making of his documentary. Shalini, let's start with a few questions on the background of the Sundarbans. I understand that the forest is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and that it's also a biosphere reserve. Could you tell us a little bit about those terms and their designations and what they mean?
Sure. I'll keep it brief here because these are extremely sort of massive categories. The Sundarbans forest, which spans the Ganga and the Brahmaputra delta between India and Bangladesh, was designated as a World Heritage Site in 1987 on the Indian side and 1997 on the Bangladesh side because it met the criteria of being an outstanding example of an estuarine ecosystem and because it's also a significant habitat for in situ biodiversity conservation. It was declared a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve and was listed under a Man and Biosphere Reserve program in order to highlight the interrelations between the communities and the ecosystem of the region. It's also a protected site under the Ramsar Treaty for the wetlands in the region.
Thank you. That's interesting and helpful. We're going to be talking a little bit about the communities next, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that it is a part of the nation's Project Tiger, which I understand goes back to the 70s. Obviously, that predates the UNESCO designations, but can you talk a little bit about this designation as well under Indian law?
Sure. Sundarbans actually has several designations under domestic Indian law as well. It was one of the 9 initial tiger reserves under Project Tiger, and this was in 1973. This was an attempt to reverse India's declining tiger numbers and really focus on tiger conservation, seeing them as a kind of umbrella species. So if you protect the tiger, you protect thousands of kilometers and associated ecosystems because of their status as an apex predator in the area. So in addition to being notified as a tiger reserve, the core area of the Sundarbans, which is the highest biodiversity protections, are given under its designation as a national park under Indian law. And there's also a buffer area around the core area, which is designated as 4 wildlife sanctuaries. Each of these has a different set of rules for permissible human activity.
That's helpful. And I understand that there are rules and restrictions for humans fishing or hunting in those areas. Could you talk just a little bit about that?
Sure. Both these designations are under India's Wildlife Protection Act. And the core areas or the national park area, in the case of the Sundarbans, restricts all human activity. While in the buffer areas, assuming people have licenses, a limited set of activities such as fishing or timber collection are allowed in that area, but extremely limited. And so there's kind of a graded human activity in these different regions of the core versus the buffer areas, which is particularly relevant in the case of the litigation that we'll be discussing later.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's really helpful as context. And as you've mentioned a little bit about the activities that are permissible, one of the points I wanted to highlight is the fact that in the popular imagination, we think about the Sundarbans known for its population of animals, flora, fauna, and then in particular, the Royal Bengal tigers. But far less is known about the approximately 4.5 million people who live there. These communities, which you've touched on a little bit, are described as quote unquote natural resources dependent. Could you elaborate a little bit on what that means?
So, what this means essentially is that an estimated quarter of the Sundarban population, so of the 4.5, say around 1.3 million, people are directly or indirectly reliant on the mangrove forest for their livelihoods. This includes, for example, fishing, catching crabs, honey collection, and timber. And this sort of reliance on forest products is also borne out by those impacted by tiger attacks. Almost 98% of those killed by the tigers in the Sundarban area were engaged in one of these activities.
You say that they're natural resource dependent, but they don't actually live in the forest. Is that correct? They're going in and out.
Yes, that's very true. And that's really due to a combination of factors. The Sundarban has a very long history of human settlement and resettlement, including in relation in its colonial history as a British controlled reserve forest, which restricted human activity within the forest. Then, in post colonial times, as the conservation policies led to the relocation of villagers from the forest core areas, and also the realities of living inside the mangrove tree stands. This is a very different settlement pattern from forests in many other parts of India. As it stands now, in the Sundarban, settlements are concentrated in the buffer areas and the outer areas of the Sundarban, with human beings going into the forested areas for fishing, crabbing, honey, and so on. There are actually no known villages within the core area of the forest.
You talked a little bit about settlement and resettlement patterns driven by colonial policies. And then, of course, more recently, this attempt to kind of push people out or we're going to get a little bit into these pressures to migrate. But I think another challenge that compounds this problem facing these communities is that they're historically marginalized groups within broader Bengali society, as well as under applicable Indian laws. Could you briefly describe these groups for our audience, which is likely not familiar with these terms?
Sure. An estimated quarter of the 4 million odd people in the Sundarban belong to what are considered the most marginalized sections of Indian society. The constitutional designations are the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. In addition, a significant number of people in the Sundarban area are designated as other backward castes. There are different histories as to the presence of different communities, but the key thing is really their social and economic marginalization, and that's borne out by some other statistics. About 40% of the households in the Sundarban are considered to be below the poverty line of approximately $10 a month, if I remember correctly, in West Bengal. And about 13% of this 40% are considered to be the poorest of the poor. So, which basically designates a number of interlocking social and economic vulnerabilities.
I also was struck by a statistic that is consistent with those grim facts about other markers of well being and socioeconomic status. And that is that the literacy rates are very, very low for this community. I think I read that it was something like 25% as opposed to 75% in West Bengal.
Absolutely. And there's a gender imbalance also in the literacy rate, men being generally scoring higher in the literacy statistics than the women.
That is an interesting kind of segue into thinking about the gendered aspects of the challenges faced within these communities. The so-called tiger widows that we'll be focusing on when we talk to Kostov face an additional social stigma. Can you talk a little bit about that? It appears to be born of religion, but I would call it really more like superstition.
Yes, I think that's an accurate way to describe it. You're absolutely right that the women whose spouses die in tiger attacks also face the additional social stigma. While there is some anecdotal evidence that this is changing, The women who lose their spouses are often blamed and ostracized by their own communities. This is a combination of reasons. Firstly, the women are often accused of moral failings that have led to their spouses dying, that they didn't observe certain rituals more stringently. There's also this idea, because of pre existing cultural norms, that consider that the tigers only kill those who are greedy or who seek more than the balance of human demands on the forest would require. That this is essentially, the death is a divine punishment for someone who's greedy. So the women are often also additionally accused of being shamikeju, or husband eaters, or bearers of bad luck. And what this effectively leads to is that they often get ostracized, they are forced to even leave their own homes, and it really compounds existing vulnerabilities from poverty, gender discrimination, and illiteracy.
Thank you for that explanation. We will be learning when we turn to Kostov a little bit also about religious rituals and also a more positive association of religion and the sense of the divine power. But what you're telling us is certainly about how there are ways in which this can really disenfranchise women and lead to their ostracism from society. I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that, we have these layers of stigma, and then certainly just the fact that these women can be very vulnerable. And that is compounded by the fact that the broader culture, as reflected in state institutions, whether it's the police or the Forest Service, don't seem to value the lost lives of, whether it's their husbands or their sons, fathers. It appears, in fact, that we seem to have a better sense of the number of tigers than we do the victims of tiger attacks. Could you talk a little bit about this disparity, which I understand has been entrenched? We're going to talk a little bit about a promising change under the law, but it sounds like there have been a lot of hurdles that make it hard for these women to seek justice for those deaths.
Absolutely. And I think this is a massive problem in the area. Briefly, I think there are effectively four key reasons for the state of affairs. The first is that the forest authorities, there's a lot of fear of forest authorities, especially if the death occurred within a protected area or without licenses that would legitimize their presence in the area. So there's a lot of fear in reporting the death in the first place. Secondly, there are also issues with accurately recording the cause of death on the part of authorities. In some cases, the bodies are missing, and so the authorities don't want to record it as a tiger attack death. And in other cases, they record it as a heart attack or even old age, from what I've seen of the death certificates. Thirdly, there's also anecdotally a reluctance to record tiger deaths on the part of the authorities. And finally, it's important to keep in mind that there are these far flung distances in the Sundarban area. And the difficulties of travel and the sheer trauma of the death means that many communities are just trying to survive, and reporting the death, getting the death certificate, becomes one more part of this death administration bureaucracy that they may not be in the position to really participate or engage in at the moment.
I was struck just by reading about the numbers of signatures that are required. And again, by this community that's, largely illiterate and just doesn't have tools or really advocates that can help them through the system. And that gets me to talking about this very, to me, promising landmark victory. I understand that, notwithstanding all these hurdles and the fact that some of these women have been waiting decades to earn the right to this compensation, which for them can be quite transformative for their families economically and financially. There was a victory in January 2024 under the Calcutta High Court. There was an order issued to the Forest Department. Can you talk a little bit about that and what the consequences it has potentially for these widows who've been waiting so long for justice?
Yes, absolutely. I really want to call out the incredible work being done by an organization called Disha in the Sundarban, especially the two principal lawyers working on the case, Shantanu Chakraborty and Atindriya Chakraborty, who have really spearheaded this litigation. What happened in brief as a background is that the state government of West Bengal has a long-standing policy of awarding compensation to individuals whose family members die or are injured from wild animals. However, accessing this compensation has been particularly difficult. As you noted, the paperwork and the signatures required, the death certificate, the post-mortem report, letters from the panchayat and the forest authorities was extremely difficult for these tiger widows. And in addition, the state government tried to essentially deny the compensation by saying that the deaths had occurred either in the core area or they lacked the licenses to be in the buffer areas. So, what the lawyers argued was that the government compensation order did not discriminate on where the deaths had occurred. And secondly, that the people who had allegedly committed the illegal acts had already paid the ultimate price. So, punishing their families a second time seemed cruel on the part of the state. And the court accepted the argument and till date has awarded compensation to at least three women, but efforts are ongoing to access this for the others as well, and it's really an uphill battle. I should also add that Disha and the lawyers I mentioned are doing some other critical work with the Tiger Widows, organizing them, training paralegals, conducting legal aid clinics, awareness camps. And I think most poignantly, their vision goes beyond the legal victory. They're really trying to build community among the Tiger Widows.
One of the interesting aspects of the work that Disha seems to be doing is that they, as you said, are like, it's kind of like know your rights clinics, but also the idea is that by training these women, then those women can be empowered within the community and then they can be self-sufficient, but also train others. And so it sounds like a really exciting model, and that it also is looking at various legal avenues. This statute, I believe there's like one involving insurance, as well as simply thinking about job training and ways to also empower these women that go beyond simply being reliant on going in and out of the forest. So thank you so much. That's been a really, really interesting deep dive into the context as well as this promising development under this law. Kostov, I want to turn to you now and want to start, first of all, with congratulating you on the documentary.
Parveen, again, I want to thank you and the DC Bar Association for having me in this conversation. Thank you.
Kostov, I met you and Elja Roy, your collaborator and the assistant director and researcher, last fall at the Tasveer Film Festival in Seattle. Shout out to Tasveer. It's an amazing festival. Kostov, I knew instantly that your project would be a fascinating and also timely subject for this DC Bar podcast series. You have noted that you, quote, felt an urgent calling to tell the stories, end quote, of the Tiger Widows after you saw footage that Elja had shot back in 2017 of a Sundarbans resident named Arjun Mundal. Could you tell us a little bit about Arjun and how his story, and equally importantly, his wife Pushpa's story, served as the catalyst for making this film?
Right. So I want to first give a shout out to Elja Roy, who has been an integral part of this film. She herself is an accomplished filmmaker. And I met her. And then when we started discussing this incident in Sundarbans, that sparked the birth of this film. So Elza, during her PhD thesis days, she was in Sundarbans and she was doing her PhD on the musical traditions of the region and how it impacts the local communities over there. And as she was doing this PhD thesis and a documentary on these things, she was staying in the house of Arjun and Pushpa. So Arjun and Pushpa were gracious enough to make sure that she stays there as she continues her documentary. Arjun, in fact, helped her tremendously as she created this documentary, staying in their houses. As she did all of these things, Arjun himself came on camera saying that how difficult life is in Sundarbans. And he started talking about tiger widows and how it is so difficult for the men and the women to live there and fight with the tigers and earn living and survival of their entire community. So he talked about all of these things on camera and saying that he wants to create a movement and he wants to make sure he reaches out to the government, the forest officials, so that all of these people are treated with dignity and they get the financial compensation that they want. So all of this happened. This was obviously off the topic of what Elza was doing. But Arjun said all of these things. And then Elza came back from Sundarbans. And then right after that, Arjun himself was killed by a tiger attack. And that was devastating for Elsa because Elsa got to know him very well personally, and both him and Pushpo, his wife. So a few years ago, Elsa and I were discussing a few things, and then this topic came up. And then as it came up, I was instantly thinking that this story needs to be told to the world, that how these people are fighting just to live, just to survive one day, they have to fight all of these things. So, and when I saw the existing footage of Arjun talking about all of these things, that sparked my interest in that. And I started collaborating with Elsa. We started doing a lot of research on this particular topic. And that's how the film idea was conceptualized. And now today we have a film on this where Arjun and Pushpo are very central to the film, where they talk about the journey of these tiger widows and their fight to survive.
Thank you. That's a great introduction. And I certainly thought that the framing of that couple at the beginning and the end, and at certain points, we return to Arjun, who's, what he says is really quite prophetic and then ultimately haunting, because sadly he dies shortly after what he's telling us about the risks that this community faced. That gets me into my next question, which is about those risks. Several men and women interviewed in this film describe their fears of venturing deep into the forest, but note that they have no choice. I'm particularly interested in how climate change, as you depicted in the film, has been leading to an increased frequency of human and tiger encounters. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I think it all stems from economic challenges in the region. That region does not have a traditional industry except for tourism, which is obviously getting bigger and bigger as time progresses. But if you go to these remote islands, there's not much of things that they can actually do to earn a living. And that is the root cause of all of these things, all of the problems. That is the reason why these men and women go out to these core and buffer areas, as Shalini was pointing out, because how would they earn a living? I mean, they can do agriculture, which is also getting difficult day by day. But the other thing is that they go to these forested areas to catch crabs, to fishing, honey collection, all of these things. And they try to earn a living through these things. And that is the root cause of all of these problems. Now, if there was a traditional economic flourishment in the region, or if the economy flourishes in the region, then obviously they don't have to do that. So they can depend on a different sort of industry or something that they can earn money from. But there's nothing that much in that region. So that's the root cause. Now, what's happening now is that the sea level is rising in that area pretty significantly. Because that's a very low-lying area, that has a huge impact. The first thing that happens is that the water becomes more and more saline because the seawater is coming in, and that creates a lot of trouble for agriculture in the region. The storms, the tropical storms that happen in the region, have increased in both frequency as well as their strength. So that is bringing in a lot of storm surges into these islands, again, making all sorts of agricultural activities very difficult. In fact, when the stormwater comes in, they cannot grow anything for 2 to 3 years. What would they do? They would have to go to the forests to earn money. So that's kind of one of the basic reasons why this is increasing day by day. Fishing in the regions where they live is also becoming more and more difficult because the sweetwater fishes are not able to survive because the waterways are becoming more and more salty, and hence the freshwater fishes are dying. So it is difficult for fishing to be economically viable mode of earning. And that's the reason why they're going into these forests. And then in the forests also, they have to get deeper and deeper into these forests because all the resources that are available on the outer fringes of the forest are also getting depleted. So they have to venture even deeper and deeper. And that creates all of these problems. The tigers don't come to the mainland to hunt. It's basically a loss-loss situation for both of these species that creates this intense human-wildlife conflict in the region. And that is getting more and more intense with these storms that are increasing, with the salinity of the waterways that are increasing, salinity of the soil that is increasing, and that is creating a situation where it's very, very difficult to survive in those islands.
Thank you for highlighting some of the profound changes that have been magnified by these various aspects of climate change that have also compounded a pre-existing challenge, which is that these communities are very limited in the kinds of industries and livelihoods that they can pursue. I also just wanted to note for our audience one striking statistics that is mentioned in the film by Sai Ravella, the MIT scholar. He mentions the fact that by the end of the century, the sea level will be at 1 meter. And also, he documents the fact that, for example, there have been 4 cyclones that have hit the eastern coast just between 2019 and 2021. I wanted to talk a little bit about something that you just described, which is basically the fact that these are increasingly narrow paths through the forest and just the increased risks that these villagers are taking. And that is related to my question about how the film was shot from a formal or technical perspective. There are breathtaking aerial shots of the mangroves. We see the vast expanse of the water and equally striking close-up footage of these narrow routes. And, the villagers go out on canoes, they're navigating at night only by lantern light. Talk a little bit about how you shot those aspects of the film. They really do visually document the threats and also the enormity of these problems that these villagers are facing.
Yeah, so my aim as I thought about this film was to create something which reaches to a wide range of global audience. And the primary challenge of that is all of these people are going to talk in Bangla, and people will have to rely on subtitles to really understand the issue. So I wanted to create a film which is intensely visual and shows the problem and the solutions also in a more visual way where the audience can relate to what's happening. And that's kind of the basis of all the storyboards that we did for the film, that how we want to make this film look visually something that catches the attention of the audience. And I wanted to show the way the locals see the place and how they experience the challenges. So that is kind of, again, the basis of all the visuals that we have shown in the film. And that essentially means that we need to show how they do their how they go about their regular days, how they go into these forests. And not only that part, but also how they live their life. And their life is pretty happy. I mean, they're very happy in their land. It's not that it's a dangerous place. I mean, people are dying. They're facing intense challenges from these cyclones. Their houses are getting broken. They cannot do agriculture anymore on those lands. But they are pretty happy in their lives. They laugh, they smile, they sing, they dance, and all of this. So I have tried to capture that essence of their life through the lens. I did not want to use a lot of drone shots, which is getting very, very common these days for a lot of filmmakers try to use those. In some cases, I had to because it shows the vastness of the region. It shows the threats that impact the region. But I have also tried to use a lot of handheld camera shots where we actually went into this forest where we were often knee deep, waist deep into the mud. And we were walking through these pneumatophores, which are constantly poking into our feet as we were walking. And the forests themselves are pretty dangerous. There are dangerous snakes. There are the world's largest crocodiles in the streams. Obviously, there are extremely challenging environment with the tigers as well. So we wanted to make sure that we do the same thing as a local person or a tiger widow would do. And that's what we have tried to show in the film, which means we also took a lot of risks as the locals did. But in order to tell a very realistic story, I felt that is extremely important and essential for the film.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And it seems to me also, again, that it's very immersive. It's kind of a cinema verite style. And one, as you said, that, and I think the handheld camera also is very effective when you are looking at the parts where we're talking simply about how resilient these women are. And, they're also simply, as you said, they're going to weddings, dinners that they throw, they forge a sense of community. I note, for example, these women grieve for their husbands and sons, but they don't give up. In fact, as one widow says, her husband's death, quote, has left her in this battleground. I have to fight. And so these women are resilient. One of them says, "We live, we laugh." And I was struck also about the fact that you talk about these rituals. Shanley talked a little bit about the challenges that are faced by some of these longstanding beliefs about the forest and the theology surrounding that. But I also noted that you depict the forest goddess, who the villagers pray to for protection when they enter the forest and to give them strength when they have suffered losses. Can you talk a little bit about that part of the film? And there you also depict this Bon Bibi festival. Talk a little bit about that and your choice in also embedding this story, which is, I think, a very sober one in the context of also this broader sense of a community that goes on and continues with its rituals.
Yeah, so if you visit the Sundarbans, which I believe a lot of people through my film will be able to experience that, there's not much of a hope in the lives of these people in terms of how they would earn their living. If tomorrow a storm comes, they'll lose their home. They'll not be able to do any farming. So all of these things are basically creating a sense that there is no hope left. And when there's no hope left, all they have is faith. And faith comes in the form of Bono Bibi. So Bono Bibi is a goddess who appeals to every faith and every religion. So people from every faith, every religion, all of them pray to Bono Bibi because that is the only hope that they have. And that's a very significant thing that we have seen. We have seen people from the Hindu religion praying to Bono Bibi. We have seen people from the Muslim religion praying to Bono Bibi and all other faiths, because that's where everything ends. And the only hope that lies is Bono Bibi. And we've shown some details of the rituals of Bono Bibi in the film, but it's an essential core belief that when nothing is there to protect them from all the adverse situations that they face and the threats that they face, Bono Bibi is going to protect them. And everybody in the forest believes that. And everybody who goes to the forest, they first, when they get down to the forest, they do a simple ritual of praying or giving some offerings to the goddess Bono Bibi, and then they enter the forest. And if you go to Sundarbans, you will see all of those things, the little red cloth that they tie to the trees, the little offerings that they give. You sail past all of these regions and you go past all of these forest regions and you'll see all those red cloths. So everybody who enters the forest does that. And it's a very interesting culture in the region to have faith in one goddess. People from all religion, all faiths have that one goddess to trust as they go to the forest.
Thank you. And I also noticed that the women who've lost their husbands and sons are also invoking Bono Bibi at other parts of the film, so that they also feel that she empowers them, that praying to her is going to help sustain them and move on. And so I think also invoking her as they seek to be resilient. I just want to close with a couple questions for both of you. And Costa, you talked a little bit about this. Arjun Mondal talks about a hope for a, quote, larger movement who face the brunt of tiger attacks. And I want to ask each of you, do you think such a larger movement is possible?
I think it was very poignant hearing Kaustav talk about Arjun Mondal, because he came up a lot during my research as well, because he was very closely involved with the Tiger Widows movement, really. And I think it's really two-pronged what he thought of when he talked about a large movement. One was, as Kaustav said, fighting for their dignity, fighting for compensation, that it isn't such a humiliating and lengthy process to get something they're entitled to by law. And the second is really getting them recognized rights under the Forest Rights Act and other legislation in India to sanctify their presence, because there is a kind of mentality among the forest department and the government that conservation trumps livelihoods of the local communities, and it's really the tiger's forest. And I think folks like Arjun Mondal and others were really pushing to try and organize and protect these women and these communities' rights of livelihood and presence in this area. And it's a very long space of human animal interactions, so to kind of recast it as just the tiger's forest felt like denying a lot of that history and reality, really.
I 100% agree with Shalini. I mean, it's a land which is inhabited by tigers. It's a land which is inhabited by humans, and they need to survive together. And on top, these issues that we are seeing increasing every day is affecting both of them. So I think there is a need to recognize the fact that they live together. And there definitely has to be a solution that creates a space for both of these species, the humans and the tigers, kind of live happily there. And I'm sure there will be more conflicts like this in the future, but I'm sure there will be a way that can be figured out where there can be a peaceful coexistence of these communities where they each can survive on their own in different regions. So I agree with Shalini on that.
Just to quickly add, from a legal standpoint, a lot of the legal safeguards were not followed in the case of the Sundarbans. So when it was designated as a tiger reserve, for example, in the 73, there was no effort to settle rights or declare the rights of people who were already there. So there's also been a history among the local people in Sundarban who have felt marginalized by the state, even for rights that they are already entitled to.
Thank you both. And I just wanted to zoom out briefly and then we'll close. Syed Ravella, the MIT scholar who appears in the film, informs us that 1 billion people currently live in low-lying delta regions and that millions of them, I think he says 260 million, will migrate, uprooting their lives in order to survive. And, we've been talking about this very specific area of the world and the ways in which climate change has upended people's lives there. But this is a crisis that is engulfing other parts of the world. And, some of the lessons that we learned from the tiger widows and these communities, I think hopefully will also inform how we look at those problems in those regions. Thank you so much for stimulating a wide-ranging conversation. I think we covered a lot: law, the environment, women's rights, anthropology, and the power of documentary film to educate, enlighten, and inspire change. For our listeners, we will make available links to additional information on these topics and these speakers' biographies, as well as a link to the trailer of the Tiger Widows film. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was a great opportunity, and congratulations to Kostu for a wonderful documentary.
Thank you. It's a pleasure talking to all of you.